Chapter 8. When the car alarm went off, Thomas had rubbed his eyes. Though all he'd wanted to do tonight was hang out with his buddies and then get a good night's sleep, after his conversations with Josie and Dylan, he'd realized two things. First, he really did want to be mayor to protect his town from what Farley would do to it. And second, a lot of work needed to be done, and fast if he was going to have a shot. He'd bugged out of guys' night early and returned to the office, where there were fewer distractions than at his condo. He'd been studying the issues Josie jotted down and trying to come up with his own ideas, which had made him realize how poorly prepared for this he was. Rather than try to fudge and guess his way through, he'd compiled a list of people he needed to talk to. He needed to know more about just about everything that went on in Coventry. Fortunately, he had enough friends and contacts in town that he ought to be able to gather the information easily. The car alarm had silenced, and he'd returned to his work when he heard the scream. A woman's scream. He stood so fast his chair rolled back and crashed into the wall. He bolted out the front door. Where was the threat? He peered up and down the street but saw nothing and nobody. Then, remembering which direction the alarm had come from, he hurried toward Cuppa Josie's. He peered down the driveway between their buildings. In the darkness, he made out the shapes of two men facing the other way. Though he didn't see anybody beyond them, he had a bad feeling Josie was on the other side. Thomas was strong, but he wasn't trained in combat, and for all he knew, they were armed. What should I do? He backed up and made his way between the houses on his side of the fence, dialing his cell as he did. When the operator picked up, he whispered, "Intruders, 116 High Street." "Hurry!" He shoved the phone into his jeans pocket, guessed where Josie would be standing, and scaled the stockade fence, wincing at the creaks in the quiet night. He peeked over. On the other side, Josie was leaning against her sedan, favoring her injured ankle. She held one crutch in two hands like a baseball bat. The other was lying on the pavement beside her. Looked like she didn't plan to go down without a fight. She wouldn't have to fight alone. He launched himself over, dropped to the ground and stepped in front of her, barely noticing her shocked gasp. He snatched the other crutch to use for a weapon. "You guys lost?" Somehow his voice sounded casual and unconcerned, despite the fear pounding in his chest. There was no way he could take on two men by himself, and if one of them had a gun, even a knife, how could he protect Josie? Could he hold these guys off until the police arrived? Would they get there in time to save her if Thomas were injured or killed? Images of what could become of her flashed through his mind, mingling with other images of a different woman. Not this time. Not again. He'd fight them. They might get to her, but they'd have to kill him to do it. But as all those thoughts jumbled in his mind, the masked men backed up a step. "Police are on their way," Thomas said. Neither of the intruders said a word. Creepy. If they'd been trying to hurt her, surely they could have. A good minute had passed since she'd screamed. No, if he were to guess, he'd say this was about intimidation. They stared past him at Josie for a protracted moment that had his pulse pounding, and then they turned and walked away. As soon as they hit the sidewalk, they broke into a sprint. Thomas turned to find Josie wide-eyed with terror. She dropped the crutch just as he scooped her up. He jogged toward the exterior staircase. "It's locked," she said. "Go to the café." He ran that way up the steps and inside. After settling her on one of the sofas, he locked the door. And then he stopped and breathed. In and out. She was safe. They were all right. As soon as his fear dissipated, fury took its place. He rounded on her in the dark dining room. "Do you have a death wish?" Her eyes were wide, her lower lip trembling. "Seriously? It's 10:30 at night. Pitch black. And you can't even run. Are you out of your mind?" I just thought, my car alarm." He let out a frustrated grunt and turned away. He had to calm down. He was scaring her, and considering how terrified she must have been before, that wasn't helping anything. No. He turned back to find her watching him with those wide eyes. No. He flipped on the overhead lights, brightening the space. The chairs had been turned over on the tables, presumably so somebody could mop. The room seemed smaller without the crowd, the sounds of people chatting, dishes clattering, machines beeping. Josie huddled on the sofa, looking terrified. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't think." Her teeth chattered. She was trembling. her skin pale, her lips taking on a bluish tint. He looked around the silent space. He'd been here enough to know. He stepped into the back room, snatched 2 throw blankets from the basket she kept by the fireplace, and returned to her side. He lifted her injured foot onto the sofa, put a couple of pillows beneath it, and then tucked the blankets around her. He didn't have to do an examination to know she was in shock. "It's okay," he said. "We're safe. Just don't ever—" He didn't need to explain the obvious. She knew now, though that could have been a very expensive lesson. He took her cold hands between his and rubbed. "You're safe now. It's okay. Did you get hurt? Your ankle? Anything else?" Her head shook so quickly that he wondered if she was answering him or trying to jar herself out of her fear. He understood that. Even though the thugs had run and the danger had passed, adrenaline pumped in his veins. What would have happened if he hadn't been next door? A few minutes later, a siren's wail carried through the walls. Just when its volume reached an unbearable level, it cut off. Thomas unlocked the front door as Zach Tyler walked toward him. Thomas knew most of the guys on the police force from his work with SAR, the fire department, and the EMTS. Not to mention that he'd gone to school with a few, including Zach. They had not been friends. The uniformed cop paused a half-second at seeing Thomas there. "Where's your partner tonight?" Thomas asked. "Stomach flu. What happened?" "Come on, I'll let Josie fill you in." Zach stepped past Thomas into the cafe and approached Josie on the couch. She made a move to sit up, but Zach waved her to a stop. "You're fine like that, ma'am. Officer Tyler." "Josie Smith, can you tell me what happened here?" Josie explained about her car alarm going off and how she'd hobbled outside to silence it, how she'd turned to find 2 men in her driveway, how they'd been walking toward her slowly. Thomas could picture the scene, could hear terror she was trying to mask in her voice as she described it. "And then," she said, "one of them took photos of me." "What?" Thomas pulled one of the chairs down from a table and sat. "I didn't see that." Her gaze shifted to him. "I think they heard you coming. The one with the phone shoved it in his pocket a second before you hopped over the fence." Zach asked, "Why would they take your picture?" She shrugged, though the answer seemed obvious to Thomas. He gave her a look intended to convey, "Tell him who you are or I will." Josie pretended not to see it. Before either of them answered Zach's question, Bentley burst into the room out of breath. He scanned the space until his gaze landed on Josie. He pressed his hand to his chest. Thank God you're all right." Zach and Thomas had both stood when he walked in. Zach said, "Who are you?" Bentley regarded Josie a long moment, probably checking for injuries before he turned to the cop and held out his hand. "Bentley Kent." The cop shook it. "What are you? How did you know?" Josie's tone radiated irritation. "Were you watching me?" No. He started to cross the room, but Zach stopped him with a hand on his chest. Josie said, "It's okay. He's a friend." Zach didn't seem inclined to move out of the way until Bentley lifted his cell phone and angled it for the cop to see. "Where did you get those?" Zach said. "They were emailed to her father. He sent them to me and asked me to check on her." "What?" Josie shoved the blankets off and lowered her feet to the floor. Her lips were no longer blue. "Why you?" "You weren't answering your phone," Bentley said. She tapped her pockets. "It's in the kitchen. I want to see what he sent." Thomas grabbed the blankets and tossed them on a table so she wouldn't get tangled. When she went to stand, he offered his hand and helped her to her feet. Everybody else was standing. He understood the need to feel on equal footing. Zach stepped out of the way, and Bentley handed her his phone. Thomas peeked over her shoulder and saw the images as she scrolled through them. Josie leaning against her car, crutches beneath her armpits. A few snaps of her dropping one, lifting the other. One of her holding it like a weapon. There were more as the photographer closed the distance between them. In each, Josie's eyes were wide. She looked terrified, but also determined. The images had been zoomed, so it looked as if the assailants stood nearer than they really had. Eventually, if Thomas hadn't hopped over the fence, they would have gotten that close. He should have attacked them from behind. He should have made an effort to get a look at their faces. He'd been focused on protecting Josie, but now he knew they'd never meant to hurt her, only to scare her and her father. Josie tipped back, bumping into him. He gripped her waist to keep her from falling. "Let's sit back down, okay?" He helped her settle onto the sofa, catching a glimpse of the worry in her eyes before he turned to Zach and Bentley. "Let's all sit." Zach pulled an armchair close and did, but Bentley seemed too keyed up. He marched around the grouping of chairs until he loomed over her. "What were you thinking? Going outside by yourself?" "I know." Her voice was timid. "It was. You could have been killed. Do you have any idea what that would have done to your family? To me?" Thomas was about to shut the jerk up, but Josie beat him to it. "I understand what could have happened." Fire blazed in her eyes, the timidity gone. "I don't need you to spell it out for me." Thomas looked away so nobody would see his smile, but he must have failed because Bentley changed tack, pointing at Thomas. "And what's this Yahoo doing here?" Thomas squelched the urge to snap that finger off at the joint. "What, did you double book yourself?" Bentley asked Josie. "2 dates in the same night?" "Let me guess. The second I dropped you off, he showed up." Thomas stood and stepped nearer. "You'd better shut your mouth before somebody shuts it for you." Bentley glared. "Is that a threat?" Zach pushed himself between them. "Both of you, sit down or take it outside." He looked from one to the other. "And if you choose the latter, you'll find yourselves in front of a judge tomorrow." He focused on Thomas. "I don't care who you are." Thomas took a step back, then resumed his seat, kicking out his legs as if he hadn't a care in the world, though it took effort to unclench his fists. But it wasn't only Bentley he was angry at. He was angry at himself. He'd been trying to protect Josie, but he'd failed. The guys had gotten her photo and escaped without a scratch. Bentley collapsed onto the sofa beside Josie. She focused on Zach, who prompted her with, "So they were taking your picture." And then Thomas jumped over the fence and stepped in front of me. He scared them away. Bentley's gaze snapped up. Thomas might have expected to see anger there, but the man surprised him. The jealousy from earlier had been replaced with what looked like gratitude, though the look faded fast. The guy might be a jerk, but his feelings for Josie seemed genuine. Zach shifted to Thomas. "Tell me what happened from your perspective." He explained the events from when he first heard the car alarm to when the guys took off. Zach turned back to Josie. "What did they look like?" "They wore masks," she said, "and I barely saw more than silhouettes. The first guy was taller than the second. I'd say maybe 6 feet, 6'1". She looked at Thomas for confirmation. He nodded. Zach said, "We'll get his description in a minute." The second guy, the one who took the pictures, was a few inches shorter. The taller one was thin, almost lanky. The shorter one, stocky, like he worked out. "What were they wearing?" "Their clothes looked black in the dark. Black pants, long-sleeved black shirts, black ski masks." "Did you see any hair? Eye color?" She shook her head. "They were too far away, and it was too dark." "And you're sure they were both men?" "Both men. I'm sure of it." Zach turned to Thomas. "Anything to add?" He closed his eyes and allowed himself to return to the moment. From the front, Josie's description was spot on. From behind, the taller one was over 6 feet. He had long hair, light-colored. It was sticking out below his mask in the back. He was thin, but I wouldn't say lanky. He had broad shoulders and thick legs. The shorter one was probably 5'10", no hair sticking out. Definitely worked out. "What about their voices?" Zach asked. "I didn't hear them speak," Thomas said. Josie said, "The taller one laughed, but they didn't say anything." "No strange cars on the street?" Josie shook her head. "I didn't notice." "Me either," Thomas said. "When they left, they ran. If they started an engine, I didn't hear it, but I was focused on getting Josie to safety." Zach turned to Bentley. "You said that you and Ms. Smith were on a date tonight. Did you pick her up?" At Bentley's nod, he asked, "Notice anything unusual when you dropped her off?" "No, nothing." "Wait a minute." Thomas focused on Bentley. "You two were out tonight? In your car? You have a problem with that?" Funny how Josie's car was here all evening, but nobody tried to break into it or lure her out until you dropped her off. How did the bad guys know she was home? Rage blazed behind the man's eyes, but Thomas didn't care. "What are you trying to say?" "I'm not trying to say anything, Beta. I'm saying Josie was perfectly safe until you showed up in Coventry. Bentley started to stand, but Josie grabbed his arm, her glare pointed at Thomas. This isn't Bentley's fault. How did those two thugs know you were home? He turned back to Bentley. Somebody tipped them off. Bentley said, You'd better shut. That's enough, both of you. Zach's cop voice brooked no argument, and Thomas clamped his lips shut. But that didn't temper his suspicion. Were the lights on? Zach asked Josie. In the back, she said. Not in here. He nodded slowly. It's possible they got lucky, saw your car and assumed you were here, or they were watching the place. The thought sent all new fears racing through Thomas's veins. He looked out the big picture window that faced the street. Was somebody out there, watching, even now? Zach shifted to Bentley. When you dropped her off, you didn't see anybody. The block's pretty deserted. He turned to Josie. It's not safe here. You know that now, right? I mean, most of these businesses are abandoned at night, except maybe, he tipped his chin toward Thomas. Everybody else lives in real houses. Then he turned to Thomas, and Thomas braced for a shot. But Bentley's tone softened. Not that I'm not glad you were here. Maybe Thomas was wrong to suspect the guy. He seemed genuinely concerned for her safety. Either that or he was a superb actor. If Bentley could be magnanimous, Thomas could too. I don't live here either. I was working late. He hated to agree with Bentley, but the guy wasn't wrong. He turned to Josie. You're pretty secluded here at night. This is my home. Josie sat up straighter. I'm not leaving. Bentley said, Then it's time for... Not now. She turned back to Zach. Do you need anything else? The police officer's gaze flicked among them and settled on Thomas. What am I missing? Not my story. The officer turned to Josie. The more we know, the better we can protect you. Obviously, somebody's trying to scare you and your father, right? She nodded but added nothing. Do you know why? I do. Are you going to tell me? I'm not, because it's irrelevant. Suffice it to say, I wasn't hurt. I don't think anybody would hurt. Oh, come on, Bentley shot to his feet. Are you kidding me? Even after this? He held out his phone, showing the picture of her, wide-eyed and terrified. Nobody hurt me, she said. He paced away, muttering obscenities under his breath. Josie watched him as he darted among the café tables across the room. Again, Thomas found himself in the unfortunate position of agreeing with the man. He kept his voice low, going for gentle. You thought nobody knew where you were. Obviously, you were wrong. She looked at him, swallowed. They're just trying to intimidate my father, scare him into doing what they want. Who is your father? Zach asked. She shook her head. Josie, Thomas said, you're not safe here at night by yourself. You either need to relocate to a safer location or hire a bodyguard. Behind him, Bentley said, there is no safer location. He stomped back toward their little group. You need protection. I've already talked to your father, and he's sending someone. You had no right. It wasn't my decision, Bentley said. Your father made it for you. If you have a problem with it, take it up with him. Her gaze flicked from one man to the next, but nobody was going to stand with her on this. Zach said, Ma'am, I wish I could tell you that the police will protect you, but chances are good that, if there's a next time, it'll go down like tonight did. Us showing up after all the excitement is over. Maybe you'll still be standing, but, he shrugged. Unfortunately, I've responded to a lot of calls that ended up much worse than this one. If you're in danger and your father's willing to pay for a bodyguard, I recommend you take him up on the offer until these guys are caught. You think they will be? We'll do our best. In the meantime, I'll feel better. And I know your friends will too, knowing you aren't alone. Take the protection. Thomas prayed she'd do as everybody recommended, because it wouldn't matter if tonight's thugs were caught. If the people behind what happened here were as powerful as Josie believed, they had money and lots of it. There would always be more thugs to hire. Fine, she said. I'll take the bodyguard. I just need to come up with a good story. Thomas blew out a sigh of relief, but a bodyguard could only do so much. Josie wouldn't be safe until the healthcare bill was voted on, or the people pulling the strings were compelled to stop, which meant Thomas would be sticking close, whether she wanted him to or not.
Chapter 9. After a short conversation with her parents the night before, in which she'd promised to keep a bodyguard with her until the vote, Josie had fallen into bed and slept surprisingly well, if not for enough hours. She'd awakened before dawn, read her Bible, and was showered and dressed by 5 o'clock. Tired as she was, the pastries were not going to make themselves, and the day before, she'd told Kinsley she could manage the early morning baking herself. Fortunately, in all the activity, she hadn't exacerbated the injury to her ankle. It was much improved. After Officer Tyler had left, Thomas had retrieved Josie's crutches from the driveway, and then Bentley had helped her up the stairs, and refused to leave. As she crutched out of her bedroom, he sat up from his space on her couch, yawning. "Is everything all right?" "Go back to sleep," she said. "I'm just going down to start for the day." "You need help?" "Nope." He seemed to debate the issue, then burrowed back under the blankets she'd found for him. She was surprised he didn't insist on joining her, but it wasn't necessary. The bakery was locked up, and Kinsley would be there in an hour. It was sweet, Bentley's desire to protect her. And after the night before, she no longer felt it was unnecessary. She was stubborn, but she wasn't stupid. And she definitely didn't have a death wish. Making her way down the narrow staircase, one hand on the railing and the other holding both crutches, she was pleased at the lack of pain in her ankle. This had been harder the day before. She took it slowly and made it to the bottom and into the kitchen without injury. She flipped on the lights, propped the crutches against the wall, started the first pot of coffee, and set to work on her daily offerings, finding peace in the rhythm of baking. She'd refrigerated last night's unbaked muffins, so she took them from the fridge and slid them into the oven. She was rolling out dough for turnovers when she caught something moving in her periphery. She spun toward the opening between the kitchen and the dining room, gasping and gripping a silicone scraper as if it were a knife. Thomas stepped in, hair mussed. He wore soft flannel pajama pants and a t-shirt, no socks. "What in the—" she said. "Why are you—" She'd had her share of strange and scary dreams the night before, and Thomas had appeared in more than one, though never as the scary part. Was this another dream? But no, she was definitely awake. "Your boyfriend didn't tell you?" "He's not my—" "Tell me what?" "I slept on the sofa out there. I was worried and—" "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you." "Bentley knew?" "Of course. You'd already gone up, but he said he'd check with you." "He had to go to the hotel and get a few things. I was in bed by the time he got settled, and he probably didn't want to bother me." That explained why Bentley hadn't insisted on coming downstairs with her. That he'd trusted Thomas to protect her said a lot. That Thomas was here, this man she'd barely known a week before, that said a lot too. "I was just hoping for coffee." Thomas's lips quirked when he added, "Don't have my wallet, though." She smiled at that. "I owe you one, or maybe free coffee for life after last night." She hobbled toward the cups, but he beat her there. "I'll get it. You go back to—" He waved toward her workstation. "Whatever that's going to be." "Apple turnovers. I don't have any espresso made for your Americano." "I think I'll survive." He filled a cup with coffee, sipped, and turned to face her. She was still watching him. His eyebrow quirked, and she shook her head. "Sorry, I'm so tired, and having you here is a little—" "I can go back out there." "No, I didn't mean—" She turned back to her work. "The muffins will be done in a couple more minutes. They're really good fresh out of the oven. Unless you need to go, you probably have stuff to do." "I'm not leaving you alone. When someone else gets here, I'll head out." She understood Bentley's protectiveness. They'd known each other for years, and he worked for her father. Dad expected Bentley to keep her safe. But Thomas had no reason to stay except an overactive protective instinct. Had he always been like that? Or had something happened in his past? Something that made him protective? She wanted to ask, but she wasn't the deep, probing questions type, because asking them invited them to be asked in return, and the last thing she wanted was to share her own secrets. He was quiet. Though she longed to peek at him, she kept her gaze focused on the dough as she rolled it out. She was starting to think he'd slipped back into the dining room when he spoke again. "Are you always at work this early?" Pastries don't actually bake themselves. So what was it about opening this place? Are you a coffee aficionado? Or were you in it for the baked goods? She glanced at him. What do you think? Though she didn't look again, she could feel his gaze on her. After a moment, he said, based on how you pour yourself into what you're doing, and that you were baking muffins last night, I'm guessing this was about the baking. Baking relaxes me. I've taken a number of classes over the years, just for fun. So when I decided to quit my job, baking seemed like a good alternative. Quite a change from politics. She chuckled. I went from a job that left me so stressed that I could barely sleep to one that relaxes me. I went from a position where I could rarely make anybody happy to one where, if I do it right, I can make just about anybody smile. Before I had to deal with conflict on a daily basis. Now, conflict is rare and can usually be solved with free muffins. Why would I ever go back? Her timer dinged, and she glanced up in time to catch his expression. He was looking at her as if she were a puzzle that needed to be solved. She started for the oven, but Thomas beat her to it. Let me. I'm glad your ankle is better, but don't overdo. She handed him the oven mitts. Set them there. She pointed to the workstation closer to the front. He did, then grabbed the 2 tins of blueberry. These go in, yes? Thanks. After he closed the oven door, she said, feel free. Banana nut. I can plate it if you... I got it, if you don't mind. He helped himself to a plate and fork and worked one of the muffins from the tin. He took the first bite and smiled. You're right. Delicious. She set her timer. Glad you like. How are you so skinny? You can't weigh 100 pounds. He'd now carried her not once but twice. He was as familiar with her weight, though obviously guessing low on the number, as she was with the width of his chest and the strength of his arms. She wasn't about to correct his assumption, just laughed and returned to the dough. He was quiet, and she was too as she worked. The next time she glanced his way, she saw that strange, curious look on his face. What? I know what you're saying about this job. It's probably much less stressful than what you did before, but I'm guessing you were pretty good at politics. I'm good at this too. Okay? You disagree? He made a show of taking another bite of muffin and swallowing. I do not disagree. You're a fabulous baker and barista and probably business owner. She felt a butt coming. Not that you have to explain yourself to me, he said, but if you're that good at politics, I just think we need people like you, people with strong values, in Washington. I mean, if all the good people open coffee shops, then who'll be left to run the cities and states, the country? That's the problem, though, she said. Once people get into positions of power, most of them lose their values. I don't believe... That's because you don't know. She folded the dough and rolled it again. You're running for office because you want to do something good. You want to protect your town from outside forces you think will harm the people here. You have high ideals. But once you get into office, you're going to find it's really hard to hang on to those ideals and keep your job. So what do? Do you willingly give your office to the next guy, a guy you don't trust as well as you trust yourself? Or do you compromise to keep power? If the first, then you're out of politics. Maybe you made a difference, maybe you didn't. But you're done. You go on with your life and trust the town or the state or the country to someone else. But if you compromise, that's when it starts to get interesting. She cut the dough into rounds. Because that first compromise turns into a second and a third. And after a while, you no longer remember the values that had you running in the first place. And the people around you, oh, they're even worse because they don't have to answer to anybody. They're pulling strings and seeing what unravels. She plopped a round of dough into her turnover mold and spooned apple filling onto it, the repetitive task barely drawing her attention. Your staff, your cronies, they don't have to face voters. They don't have to defend themselves. And their actions are hidden, not just from voters, but from you. Nobody tells you what's going on. That way, you'll have plausible deniability. And maybe you won't even know what's been done in order to get you reelected or to get your programs passed. Josie's father didn't know all the things his staff had done to keep him in office, all the things she'd done. If he knew, she hated to consider what he'd think of her. "You'll be on one of those Sunday shows," she said, smiling at the hosts, telling people what you believe, and voters will buy it because, maybe in your case, it'll be true. Meanwhile, behind the curtain, you'd be shocked to learn what's going on behind the curtain. If you knew, you'd realize that you'd compromised your values, whether you meant to or not. She plopped a turnover onto her baking sheet beside the rest. "Here at the shop, somebody wants to know what goes into the dough. I'll tell them. It's simple. Flour, sugar, baking powder, baking soda, salt, butter, loads of butter, which might not be good for you, but it's not going to get anybody killed." She pinched the edges of her turnover and added the next round to the mold. Her heart was pounding as if she'd just run a race. What was she doing? What was she saying? Thomas was leaning against the counter, watching her with wide eyes. "Anyway, I'm just saying." She swallowed hard. It had to be fatigue that had released the torrent of words. Fatigue and fear, knowing her old life was catching up with her. Maybe what had happened the night before had nothing to do with what she'd done back then. Still, evil begot evil. Hate begot hate. Lies begot lies. It was time for a reckoning.
Chapter 10. Based on the horror on Josie's face when she looked at Thomas, he guessed she'd forgotten who she was talking to. He smiled, though probably too late to mask the worries her words had unleashed. "Sorry," she said. "Sorry, I didn't mean—" "You don't owe me an apology. You obviously know a lot more about this than I do. But that doesn't mean—" She plopped another turnover into the weird metal tool and crimped the edges. "Not every politician compromises his ideals. My father hasn't. I mean, he's had to make compromises over the years, of course. That's the business of being a senator. They have to give a little to get a little. But he hasn't compromised on what matters. Which is why all this is happening," he said. "If your father would vote for the bill—" "Exactly." Her lips pinched closed and her brown eyes filled with torment. "What happened, Josie?" When she met his eyes, her lips were no longer pinched but slightly open, her eyes bright with fear. "What do you mean?" "You were obviously speaking from experience." She went back to her task. "I've seen it all." A sufficiently vague answer, but he didn't call her on it. She had enough on her plate without feeling like she had to explain herself or defend herself to him. "You think if I become mayor, I'll lose my values?" Her shoulders lifted and dropped. "I don't know you that well. But you wouldn't be surprised. Mayor of Coventry isn't exactly a position of great power." "Meaning?" "Meaning I don't know. I've only ever been involved with national politics, so I don't know what happens in small-town America. Once people get to the national stage, things are different. They're different. Or maybe—" She shook her head. "I don't know. It's possible I'm jaded." He chuckled. "Wow, you think?" A smile played at the corner of her lips. "Maybe more than jaded. Maybe enough jade to make a nice necklace," he said, "and matching earrings." That made her laugh. Goal accomplished, though he wasn't feeling amused. "I don't want to compromise who I am or what I believe." "Then don't." Her words had him doubting himself. "How do you recommend I stop that from happening?" "Know the people in your inner circle, and be sure you can trust them. Be sure they're looking out for your best interests, but also that they're not the win-at-any-cost type, because there are some costs you don't want to pay. If you were in my inner circle—" "No. Come on, you could help me, and Derek and anybody else who volunteers. Not just to do all the things, but to stick to our values." She brushed the turnovers with melted butter. The timer dinged. He started that direction, but she got there first, limping slightly. She carried muffin tins to the table near him. Then she slid the turnovers in. She was very efficient at this baking thing. She hobbled back to her counter. "How do you know I can be trusted?" "Are you kidding? Did you hear your little lecture? You obviously care about this stuff. You've already failed your first lesson." He let out a chuckle that even he didn't believe. "Anybody can talk a good game, Thomas." There was no amusement in her expression. "It's not about what a person says. It's about what they do. It's about who they are when nobody's looking. I trust you to say and do the right thing. I trust you to be the same person whether somebody's looking or not." "Why?" Because, because you're trustworthy. Based on what? He set his plate on the counter behind him. Based on... But there was no good answer to that. He hadn't seen her in action. He heard her impassioned words, and she had no reason to lie to him. But words were all he had. Okay, I see your point. But how am I supposed to ever know anybody that well? That's the problem. How can you? Are you saying I can't? Irritation sharpened his words. Is this a riddle I'm supposed to solve? Another test? Unfortunately, no. She swiped her workstation and grabbed a clean bowl and a measuring cup. Then she stopped what she was doing and met his gaze. Truth is, Thomas, I don't have an answer for you. I don't know how you're supposed to separate the power-hungry from the humble, the people who'll say anything from the people with integrity. If I knew that, maybe I'd help with your campaign. Heck, if I knew that, maybe I'd go back to Washington. And then she mumbled something under her breath, something he didn't quite make out. All he caught were the words, as if I weren't one. One what? But he didn't ask. Josie's guard was back in place. No more insights for now. Not into politics, not into her. He cared more about the second than the first. I hate to mention it, he said, but I've now rescued you twice. Suspicion lurked in her squinting eyes. I thank you for that. Some might say you owe me. He tempered the words with a smile so she'd know he was kidding. You're better at playing politics than I'd guessed. Come on, I could really use your help, and it would give me a good excuse to hang around more, which I'm going to be doing anyway, until your father casts his vote. I don't need your protection. He let his facial expression show his amusement at her statement, which was ridiculous, all things considered. I don't need it anymore, she said. Dad hired me a bodyguard. She'll be here later today. Though Thomas would have preferred a big, burly man, a woman could do the job. Can I at least ask you questions now and then? Thomas was probably pressing his luck, but he'd press until she shut him down for good. She seemed to mull that over as she watched the water in her bowl foam. Oh, yeast. She was making bread. He wasn't a complete novice when it came to baking. He'd watched his mother make her share of muffins and bread over the years. I guess, she said, I do owe you. He laughed. You don't owe me anything, Josie. We're friends now. Friends help each other, and I could really use your help. She measured a cup of flour, then dumped it into the yeast. I'm glad we're friends. Her expression turned almost shy. In all the years I've been in Coventry, I haven't made any of those. He would take friendship with Josie, for now, but eventually he hoped for more. Not just her political skills either.
Chapter 11. Josie had her foot elevated on the sofa in the back room of the café after lunch that afternoon. Her ankle had held up well while she'd baked that morning, but it was aching now. She hoped she hadn't overdone it. The bodyguard had arrived during the lunch rush. Josie wasn't sure what she'd been expecting, but the 6-foot-tall blonde with the knockout body wasn't it. The woman could have been a model, except she wasn't stick-skinny like so many of those airbrushed women on magazine covers. No, if Lake, her last name, Josie thought, but the bodyguard hadn't shared her first, ever found herself on the cover of a magazine, it would be one of those fitness glossies. Josie could imagine her wearing a shiny workout outfit, her long hair in a ponytail. She'd be sporting boxing gloves and a huge smile, assuming the woman smiled. Lake probably wouldn't appreciate the image if Josie shared it, which she wouldn't. Lake didn't seem the chatty type. She stood with her back to the wall, her gaze darting from the door to the main dining room, to the door to the restrooms to the windows outside. Could you please sit? Josie asked. No, ma'am. The ma'am sounded foreign in that thick Boston accent. At least the back room was empty for the moment. The lunch crowd had gone, and it would be hours before the dinner crowd would file in. She'd started Cup of Josie's as a coffee and pastry shop, but had expanded over time. She'd begun by offering a few lunch specials. Now she served a full deli menu through the dinner hour every day. I was sort of hoping you could relax a little so people would assume you were a friend, Josie said. But that's going to be hard if you insist on standing the whole time you're here, and if you refuse to engage in conversation. Lake spared her a glance, though it exhibited about as much emotion as a gravel driveway. I was under the impression that your life was in danger, in which case, I need to remain standing and keep vigilant. If you're looking for a friend, there are more effective ways to find one. That's not what I... Was the woman really so clueless? Her father had assured her that Lake came highly recommended, that she had the experience and expertise needed to keep Josie safe. If Josie complained, he'd just send somebody else. At least Lake was a woman. The last thing Josie needed was another man telling her what to do. Between Dad, Bentley, and Thomas, she had quite enough of those. She'd texted her best friend before she'd gone to bed the night before to catch her up on everything going on. Shelley'd responded in her usual high-drama way. She'd even tried to call, but Josie'd brushed her off, saying she was going to sleep and she'd call her today. She needed to do that. Shelley would probably worry herself sick until they spoke in person. Though Josie loved Shelley, they'd been friends since preschool. Conversations with her were rarely relaxing. To Lake, she said, "I just don't want the world to know I have a bodyguard." "Yes, you do," Lake said. "If they know I'm here, they'll be less likely to come after you." "If I moved a chair to that wall so you could sit..." "I'd move it back," Lake said. Well, this was going to be fun. "Let's go to my apartment." Josie wasn't getting any work done anyway. The few people who'd stepped in looking for a table had taken one look at Lake and stepped back out. Attractive as she was, Lake wasn't doing her business any good. She'd left her crutches in the kitchen, so she limped to the inside staircase and made her way up. She settled on the couch in her apartment, while Lake checked out the space to make sure the boogeyman hadn't gotten in while they'd been downstairs. When she was finished, she positioned herself by the exterior door. Wise, considering Josie was the only person to use the interior one, and there were locked doors on both ends of the narrow stairwell. Josie grabbed her laptop. She'd focus on her work and try to ignore the 6-foot blonde standing against the wall. She wanted to figure out who was coming after her and find out a way to stop them. There had to be a way. Before she'd even begun the research, footsteps sounded on the outdoor stairs, which led into her apartment. When a knock sounded, Lake peeked out. "It's Mr. Kent." At Josie's nod, she opened the door. Bentley passed the bodyguard, they'd met earlier, and settled on the chair beside Josie, where he opened his laptop. "How's your ankle?" "Better. Did you arrange the meeting?" He glanced at his watch. "We have a conference call. I'm glad you're already up here." He navigated to the conferencing program. A few minutes later, the images of her father and Carlisle filled the screen, each in his own box. Though he was only 59, Carlisle's hair and beard were completely silver. He had striking blue eyes in a rather ordinary face. Ordinary, but he comported himself as a powerful man, which somehow made him seem more handsome than he was. Dad, on the other hand, was dashing. His hair was still brown, though it was graying at the temples. Funny how that only made him more attractive. "I'm here with Josephine." Bentley sat beside her on the sofa, so the camera would show them both. Carlisle said, "Glad to put eyes on you, Josie." It wasn't hard for him to use her nickname. Josie'd known her father's chief of staff for as long as she could remember, since way back before she'd moved to D.C. and started going by her full name. He was the perfect behind-the-scenes kind of guy. His voice was more nasal than soothing, and she doubted he could garner votes himself if he chose to run for office. But he was one of the smartest men Josie'd ever met, which made him perfect for the role of chief of staff. "How are you, darlin'?" Unlike Carlisle, Dad's voice could boom through rooms and demand attention. The more volume he put behind it, the more passionate he seemed. That same voice could sound calm or vehement, gentle or urgent, and in every situation, it was deep and trustworthy. At that moment, the concern in her father's tone wrapped around her like a hug. Even though he was on the far side of the screen, just seeing him made her feel comforted and loved. "I'm okay, Dad. The bodyguard is here." Josie glanced at Lake, who seemed to not be listening. "She's not going to blend in. Everybody's going to know I have security." "Can't be helped, I'm afraid." Josie had worked hard to lose her southern accent, but Dad had lost none of his over the years. "Your safety is more important than your anonymity." Maybe to him. I've built a life here. I'm trying. Nobody needs to know you're related to the senator, Carlyle said. Come up with a story people will believe. You want me to lie? Not lie. The man's tone conveyed his every thought, and at that moment, Carlyle thought she was being ridiculously naive. Just misdirect. So, lie. And what story could possibly explain Lake? Bentley shook his head, telling her to let it go. We need to figure out who was behind last night's attack. It wasn't an attack. They hadn't come near enough to even touch her, much less attack. Only because of Thomas Windham, Dad said. Speaking of, Carlyle? He's clean, no record, no… Wait. Josie's voice was louder than strictly necessary. You looked into Thomas? Why? Carlyle answered, no hint of apology in his voice. Bentley thought it seemed awfully coincidental that he just happened along when you needed him. She glared at the man in her living room. He works next door. It was after 10. What was he doing there? Working! Or so he said. Bentley gentled his voice to a condescending tone she hated. I didn't start suspecting him until this morning. Last night I was so grateful he was there that I didn't think about what it might mean. But now… You're crazy, she said. Thomas didn't do anything wrong. Carlyle said, I agree, Josie. It wasn't a bad idea to check him out, but there's no reason to think he's working against us. In fact, he's made a number of contributions to pro-life causes over the years. Why would you… I have a guy, Carlyle said. She knew about Carlyle's guys. She'd worked with a few of them over the years. Carlyle was good at what he did, protecting her father and his interests, but he could be ruthless to get what he wanted. Better safe than sorry, Bentley said, and you have to admit, Thomas has been hanging around an awful lot. We're friends. Bentley studied her, as if he were trying to see beyond her simple explanation to something else, but there was nothing for him to see. There was nothing between her and Thomas but friendship. She'd shut that other option down. After their conversation that morning, after all the time she'd spent with him in the previous few days, a tiny part of her was sorry about that. I agree that we can trust him, Dad said. I understand he's running for mayor. He is, Josie said. Against the incumbent, Carlyle added. He has a tough battle ahead of him. He's a longtime Coventry native, Dad added. Why would Dad bother to learn so many details about her neighbor? This conversation had suspicion thrumming in her brain. What were they up to? Knows everybody, Dad continued. And he's obviously got a soft spot for you, Josie. What are you getting at, sir? Bentley asked. We need all the allies we can get up there, Dad said. I'm thankful Windham was here last night, but Josie has a bodyguard now. Bentley's tone was dismissive. She doesn't need that guy. Lake didn't react to their talking about her, as if she weren't in the room. I'd sure feel better if I could come up there and see you, Dad said. Then we could assess the situation and better see about your safety. I'm safe here, Dad. Her parents had never visited her. They'd wanted to, but she'd feared their arrival in town would broadcast Josie's identity. Now, with a bodyguard, with her life in danger because of her father's position, she wasn't sure she could keep it secret much longer. Not that anybody in Coventry would care about the daughter of a Southern senator. It wasn't as if Dad were a celebrity, though he'd become more of a national figure since the recent election. Their party held only a functional majority in the Senate, and Dad had gone against them more than once, keeping laws from being passed or even coming to a vote because he withheld his support. As the lone lawmaker in their party willing to stand up to a president, trying to ram through a bunch of policies he thought would be bad for the country, Dad was recognizable, his name well known and repeated on news channels and in papers every day, which only made her anonymity more precarious. Not that she minded her father's prominence. She just didn't want to be pulled into the fray again. Carlyle said, I've got an update on Friday's shooter. Investigators are convinced he was acting alone. Considering what happened last night, Bentley asked, how can that be? They think the two incidents are unrelated. What do you think, Dad? It didn't make sense to me either, he said. but the investigator convinced me that the fellow who took that shot at me Friday isn't connected to anyone in power at all. He's mentally unstable and has a mountain of medical debt and believes the healthcare bill will save him from having to pay it back. Which it wouldn't, right? Josie asked. The bill's proponents are hinting that it would wipe out people's medical debts and keep them from mounting more, Dad said. But there's actually no provision that would grant that, or even encourage costs to go down. No, most of the money in the bill is pork. Fancier hospitals in wealthy communities, funding for a handful of pet projects in districts that'll get the incumbents reelected and line the pockets of their biggest donors. Dad continued as if he were speaking to reporters, or constituents, instead of his own family and staff. It's a huge money grab camouflaging as a healthcare bill. A knock sounded. Lake opened the door, spoke to someone, then closed it again. Thomas Windham is here to see you. Her father said, Good, good, let him in. Dad? Senator, Bentley said, we need. I want to talk to the man who saved my daughter's life. Neither Josie nor Bentley bothered arguing. She nodded to Lake, who swung the door open. Thomas zeroed in on her and Bentley on the couch together. I didn't mean to interrupt. Josie's little one-bedroom apartment had never seemed so small. We're on a conference call, she said, and they want to talk to you. Thomas's eyebrows hiked. Okay. He moved closer and stood behind the sofa to face the screen. Dad, this is Thomas Windham. To him, she said, Thomas, my father, Senator Davis Harrington. Thomas focused on the screen. Honored to meet you, sir. Honor's mine, young man. Have a seat there. We'd like to talk to you. Josie scooted closer to Bentley, and Thomas sat on her other side. Well, this was cozy. Carlisle Nichols, Carlisle said. We wanted to talk. Before we get to all that, Dad said. All that? What were they talking about? Had they planned this? I wanted to personally thank you for protecting my daughter last night. Way I understand it, you put yourself between her and danger, unmindful of what might happen to you. It wasn't. Thomas seemed to rethink what he'd planned to say. I'm glad I was there. Well, I am too, Dad said. I understand you weren't in the armed services, right? And you're not a police officer? Thomas glanced at her, confusion as clear on his face as his brown eyes. No, sir. Poor guy had no idea what he'd just walked into, Josie guessed. Thomas is on the volunteer search and rescue crew here in Coventry, and he's a volunteer fireman as well. And sometimes he helps out with the local EMTs, right? Yeah. He drew out the word, confused, maybe suspicious. Wherever you learned it, son, you've got a real protective streak in you. Dad's voice held admiration, something she didn't hear often from her father. I like that, like it a lot. Okay. And then, almost as if it were a question, thank you. Bentley blew out a loud, exasperated breath. Dad either didn't hear it or ignored it. Carlisle, why don't you tell Thomas what we were thinking? We had sort of a trade in mind, Carlisle said. Wait, Josie said. What trade? Carlisle ignored her. We understand you're running for mayor. I doubt you know this, but Josie's got a brilliant political mind. I had surmised that, yes, Thomas said. You're a protective sort, Carlisle said. If it were up to the senator, he'd hire a whole team of bodyguards to protect her. But Josie won't hear of it. We had to practically arm wrestle her to get her to agree to the 2 she's got. 2? We were thinking that Josie could help you with your campaign, and you could stick close, help keep her safe. What do you think about that? Whoa. What? No, she said. Absolutely not. Thomas ran a hand through his hair and shook his head. I'm sorry, but I won't be able to accept Josie's help on my campaign. Dad said, Listen, son. Look here, Carlisle said. Bentley laughed. Under his breath, he muttered, Idiot. Josie just turned to the man beside her and stared. Hadn't Thomas asked her for her help that very morning? Maybe her little speech had gotten through to him. Maybe he didn't trust her. The thought should have brought relief, not this prickly defensiveness. "You don't understand what we're offering," Carlyle said. "It doesn't have to be anything formal," Dad added. The men in her life continued to talk, but she ignored them, trying to figure out this man beside her. What was going on in his head? Thomas held up his hand, and everyone quieted. "Senator, I would love to agree to this. Heaven knows I could use Josie's help. She taught me more in a 30-minute conversation yesterday than I would have learned in years of study. But I asked her for her help, and she refused. Would he use that against her now? She hadn't taken him as the petty sort. Not that she wanted to work on his campaign, and not that she wanted him to help protect her, but that he'd refuse. Now, son." Thomas lifted that hand again, and her father nodded for him to continue. "If I were to agree to this, I know Josie would do her very best to uphold her part of the bargain, and I need her help, but I refuse to force it." "She doesn't mind," Carlyle said. "Do you, Josie?" Thomas looked in her direction, his curiosity and frustration clear. The man needed to learn to mask his feelings. He wanted her help, and he realized he needed it. He was refusing because he respected her wishes. She'd called him an alpha male. In her definition, that made him the kind of guy who'd go to any lengths to get what he wanted. The kind of guy who was powerful and knew it. She was surrounded by alpha males. Her father, Carlyle, Bentley, all using their power and positions to get what they wanted. That they wanted to protect her was beside the point. And Thomas, when offered exactly what he wanted on a silver platter, and the opportunity to impress a powerful senator to boot, refused in deference to her. She'd been wrong about him, very wrong. Rather than answer Carlyle's question, she said to Thomas, "This isn't your problem." Thomas turned back to the screen. "As to protecting Josie, I'd already planned to do that. I don't need to be incentivized, and I don't expect anything in return." Dad's eyes shifted into that studious look Josie knew meant he was confused and unsure, but trying to hide it. Carlyle said, "Well, I think you're a fool to turn her down. But if you're willing to keep your eyes out for our Josie, we'll take your help. You'll need to back off all your other volunteering duties for the time being." "I think that's enough," Josie said. "Thomas doesn't owe me anything, and he certainly doesn't need to rearrange his life on my account." To him, she said, "I'll be fine. I have Lake over there." She gestured to the Venus statue against the wall. "And Bentley's not going anywhere for a while." Hurt crossed Thomas's expression, as clear as if he'd spoken his pain aloud. "I'd like to hang around too, make sure you're all right. I even moved a few things over from my condo so you won't be alone on the street at night." Bentley stood. "That hardly seems necessary. I'll be staying here." "No, you won't." This was getting ridiculous. "I don't need any more babysitters." Josie gestured to Lake. "My new bestie and I will do just fine. Right, Lake?" The blonde looked their way. "I never turn down help, ma'am. If it were up to me, there'd be a team of guards to protect you. I'd rather work with pros. But if this is what we've got..." She lifted her shoulders in a you-take-what-you-can-get gesture. "All right then," Carlyle said. "It's settled. Bentley, sit. Now, let's talk about what we know." Josie sneaked a glance at Thomas, who settled in to listen as if this hadn't been the weirdest conversation he'd ever been a part of. As if he got yanked into meetings by U.S. senators about protecting virtual strangers on a daily basis. He caught her looking and nodded, no smile. She'd hurt his feelings. This man who'd already done so much for her, who was evidently willing to do so much more. She'd make it up to him, and she knew precisely how to do it.
Chapter 12. Thomas had received a strange call from Senator Harrington's office, asking him to go to Josie's apartment. He'd questioned the woman on the phone, but she hadn't known anything else about it. He'd figured the senator wanted to thank him for protecting Josie the night before. He'd never guessed he'd be asked to keep her safe in exchange for her help on his campaign. But how could he put her in that position? It had been clear by her reaction that she'd had no idea what her father and Mr. Nichols planned. Bentley hadn't known either. Josie shifted, moving her injured ankle to rest it on the coffee table. Thanks to his short-sleeved shirt and her pretty sleeveless blouse, when her arm brushed against his, he felt the warmth of her skin. It was distracting enough that he tried to inch away. Unfortunately, the sofa wasn't that big. Mr. Nichols Carlyle moved the discussion to theories about who was behind the events the night before. There's a whole bevy of folks who have a lot to gain if that bill gets passed. I talked with Nanette this morning, Senator Harrington said. Josie leaned close to Thomas and whispered, Nanette Parker, Senate Majority Leader, he supplied just as quietly. I figured. Josie looked impressed, but Nanette wasn't the most common name in the world, and the woman had been in politics since the cooling of the Earth's crust. What did the Crypt Keeper have to say? Bentley asked. Nothing you wouldn't expect, the senator said. That she has no idea who was behind what happened last night, and that the quickest way to resolution would be for me to vote yes on the bill. Do you believe her? Bentley asked. The senator shrugged. Do I think she hired thugs to intimidate Josie? No. Do I think people working on her behalf might have done so? Maybe. They're running out of time. Josie leaned close and whispered, Everything changes come November. We'll probably lose a bunch of seats in the Senate, and then... I understand. Thomas kept his voice low. He wasn't lost. He was intrigued. She's not above dirty politics, Carlyle was saying. The woman's got more skeletons than Arlington Cemetery. If these attacks are coming from her... I don't know, the senator said. Nanette's a lot of things, but she has a family of her own. Attacking mine opens up hers, and I don't think she'd risk that. She's passionate about what she believes, but I don't think she'd go so far as to threaten my daughter to get my vote. That's pretty naive, Carlyle said. Not naive. Josie inserted herself into the conversation for the first time. If it got out that Senator Parker was using devious tactics against members of her own party, she'd lose her position. Parker loves nothing more than being in command. Josie shook her head. No, I don't see it. She'll do everything in her power to get you to vote her way, Dad. If you don't crumble under the pressure, she'll make sure you have a well-funded opponent in the primary. The party's planning that, the senator said. I've burned my bridges with party leadership already this session. I can't see rebuilding them. But you've got 2 years before you have to worry about that, Josie said. Meanwhile, she'll try to shame you, twist your arm, do whatever she can to get you to vote her way. But at the end of the day, it's more important to her to be the leader, majority or minority, than to get any one bill passed. Parker is all about Parker. She won't risk her job for this or any other bill. Carlyle seemed to weigh her words, nodding slowly. The senator beamed with pride. I miss having you around, Josie girl. Thomas caught the soft expression she was giving her father. It morphed into a serious one before she spoke again. What about party leadership? Carlyle fielded that. The party's out for blood. Again, the question is, would they stoop this low? Would they risk the stain if it were to come out? There was a moment of contemplation, but nobody could answer the question definitively. Finally, Josie said, I'd be surprised if anyone in Washington is behind last night's threats. Let's talk about who else stands to gain if the bill is passed. Carlyle, Bentley, and Josie threw out names and debated them. Heads of corporations, heads of political organizations, lobbyists. They debated who had the most to gain by the passage of the healthcare bill and who would be most likely to sink to sinister tactics. The senator listened but offered little input. Thomas, of course, had nothing to say. He should probably excuse himself. He had work to do, after all, a business to run. But his associates could keep the office running smoothly without him. He made less money because of all the help he hired, but it gave him the freedom to volunteer whenever help was needed. Right now, Josie needed his help. And honestly, he was curious. He wanted to know who would come against her. He needed to be prepared. Not that the blonde standing guard at the door couldn't handle it. Maybe she could. But if Josie's enemies were as well-funded as these people seemed to believe, a couple of bodyguards weren't going to cut it. And of course, Carlyle said, there's Mitchell. Josie stiffened. Jude Mitchell? She turned to Bentley. Neither said anything, but the room hummed with tension. Carlyle didn't seem to pick up on it. That's right. You two had dealings with him before. There was a beat of silence before Bentley spoke. Back during the election, he's ruthless. I remember Jude, the senator said. His dad and mine used to play golf together, back in the day. We lived in the same part of town. He and I never hit it off, even though our families were friends. What makes him ruthless? Silence greeted the question. Thomas resisted the urge to lean forward to look at Bentley and Josie and their unspoken communication. Bentley answered, "It's a long story. Suffice it to say, he's not above using underhanded tactics to get what he wants." "He's a physician," the senator said, "if you can call it that." Thomas asked, "What do you mean?" Josie said, "I'm not sure he's practicing anymore, but when he was—" Her voice trailed. She blew out a long breath. "He's an abortionist." Thomas cringed at the ugly word. "Owns clinics all over the South and Midwest, and he's looking to expand." The senator's lips twisted in what could only be disgust. Bentley leaned forward to speak to Thomas. The health care bill would offer federal funding to build new abortion clinics in the poorest neighborhoods across the country. Josie's explanations were slightly irritating. Bentley's had Thomas squelching the urge to punch his smug face. "I know, I can read." Josie raised an eyebrow at Thomas before turning back to the screen. "Mitchell hates me, and the feeling is mutual. What happened last night? I wouldn't put it past him." "But how did he find you?" the senator asked. Finally, Thomas had something to offer. "I asked a private investigator I know about that. He figured a good PI could find her in a matter of hours." "So much for your anonymity," the senator said. "Mitchell knowing where I am doesn't matter," Josie said. "It's the locals I don't want knowing my identity." The senator's lips turned down at the corners, and his eyes softened. "I'm sorry my position has made your life so difficult. This isn't about you, Dad. It's about me. It's about who I was turning into." "What does that mean?" he asked. "What were you turning into? As far as I could tell, you were a brilliant strategist. I loved having you on my team." "There are things you don't know." "Like?" She shook her head. Her father regarded her for a long time while Carlyle and Bentley looked away. They were probably thinking the same thing Thomas was, that they'd rather be anywhere else than witnessing this awkward exchange. Carlyle broke into it with, "So, let's say it's Mitchell. What can we do?" Before any of them could answer, a knock sounded at the door. The bodyguard opened it and peeked out. She closed it and turned to Josie. "Shelley Sanders to see you." Josie jumped up. "Shelley's here? Let her in." The bodyguard did, and a petite, slender woman with pale blonde hair stepped into the room, eyeing Lake. "Who the—" She cut off her question before she finished it. Josie scooted past Thomas, and the two women hugged. "How are you here? Are you all right?" Shelley held Josie at arm's length and studied her. "After your call, I just had to see for myself that you're okay." "I'm fine. I'll tell you everything, but—" Josie gestured to the screen. "We're in the middle of a meeting." Thomas stood to greet the newcomer. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt." Shelley approached the sofa. Her gaze landed on Thomas and stayed there a long moment before it slid away. Bentley. Shelley. Not long-lost besties, then. Shelley continued to the back of the sofa and faced the screen. "Senator Mr. Nichols, it's good to see you." "I'm glad you're there, Shelley," Senator Harrington said. "Josie can use all the friends she can get right now." Shelley hooked her arm in Josie's. "I plan to stick to her side like glue." The look that crossed Josie's face was a combination of happiness and horror. Thomas barely resisted the urge to chuckle. "If you don't mind heading back to my bedroom," Josie said. But Carlyle spoke before Shelley. "I think we're about done here. Y'all contemplate what we were discussing and get back to us. You agree, Senator?" "That's fine." "Fair enough," Bentley said. The senator added, "Take care, sweetheart," and ended the meeting. Thomas turned his attention to the women standing beside the sofa. "Thomas, this is my oldest and dearest friend, Shelley Sanders." She stuck out her hand. He shook it. It was small, like everything else about her, except, he guessed, her personality. She was cute and bubbly, like a 30-year-old cheerleader, and wore a hot pink dress that showed more cleavage than one generally saw on a Tuesday afternoon in Coventry. She gave him a wide smile. "It is very nice to meet you." Beside her, Josie sighed. "And you know Bentley." The woman went from bubbly cheerleader to angry she-bear. "What are you doing here?" "Same as you, checking on Josie." "She's fine, I'm here now." They engaged in a staring contest as if there were prize money involved. Josie hobbled away. "You two are going to have to come to a truce." Shelley pulled a set of keys from her pocket and held them out to Bentley. "Why don't you go get my luggage?" He glared, but after a glance at Josie, said, "With pleasure." A blatant lie, but nobody called the man on it as he passed the bodyguard and pounded down the steps. "Well," Thomas said, "much as I'd love to hang around." "I'm so sorry you got pulled into all of this," Josie said. "You have better things to do than worry about me." "Not better things, but more pressing things, considering your friends are here." Shelley looked between them. "I'm going to go use the bathroom. You two just—" She waved between them and giggled before flitting down the hall. "She's unique," Thomas said when she was gone. Josie laughed. "Wait until you get to know her. I'm glad she's here, and just to be clear, I'm not at all sorry that they asked me to help protect you. I'm honored. I didn't know they planned that. If you had, I'm guessing you'd have tried to stop them. Not that they would have listened to me. I picked up on that too. No wonder Josie was defensive around powerful men. She was surrounded by them, and they didn't exactly take her desires into consideration. Anyway, I'm glad to help, but I better go. Derek's probably waiting for me downstairs." "About that?" "Don't, it's fine." "I want to," she said. "I'm going to work on your campaign." "You don't owe me anything." "And you don't owe me anything, yet you're helping me." "Because we're friends." "Which is why I'll be helping you too. Because we're friends, okay?" He'd be an idiot to refuse. "Whatever you can do, I'll take it." She smiled, and the expression sent his stupid heart fluttering like he was the captain of the math club talking to the homecoming queen. "You've been working on your platform?" He nodded, wishing he'd done more. "I spent the morning talking to people about issues I don't fully grasp." "Smart. You and Derek put together your ideas today. You and I will go over them. Maybe this evening. Depends on what Shelley has in store for me." "That sounds ominous." "Trust me, when Shelley's involved, it always is." From down the hall, Shelley yelled, "I can hear you." "I know. That's why I said it." Josie lowered her voice and leaned in. "Pray for me." Thomas was still laughing as he stepped out the door, passing Bentley on the way. The bodyguard scowled at both of them. Apparently, they needed permission to enter and exit. Josie wasn't looking, so he and Bentley didn't pretend to be cordial. Josie might see Thomas as a friend, and he was trying very hard to see her the same way. But Bentley knew the truth, and Thomas wasn't about to deny it.
Chapter 13. Josie turned her attention to her friend as she returned from the bathroom. "What in the world are you doing here?" Shelley plopped on the sofa. "After what happened last night, how could I not come? I'm worried about you." Josie took the chair catty-corner to her, but before she could speak, Bentley came back in. He set a suitcase, not an overnighter, against the wall. "Anything else, Your Majesty?" he asked. "Be nice," Josie said. Bentley pressed a smile on his face that looked about as authentic as Mr. Potato Head's. "Sorry, sweetheart." She was not his sweetheart, and he knew it. He'd used the term of endearment to irritate Shelley. "It occurred to me, as I was hauling Her Highness's trunk up the stairs, that you don't have a guest room. Is she staying here?" Josie turned to include her friend in the conversation. "Actually, Shelley, the couch'll work. That's where I slept last time." Lake cleared her throat, and everybody turned to her. "I plan to stay on the couch. We have a room at a hotel." "We?" Josie asked. "My partner and I. Our understanding from your father is that this enemy will wait until you're alone to attack, so you should be safe in public. At night, one of us will be here at all times." She nodded at Shelley. "Sorry for the inconvenience." The woman was clearly not sorry, but who was going to argue with her? Shelley heaved a dramatic sigh. "I can get a room. Do you think there are any available?" "Probably not," Bentley said. "I had to pull strings for mine. The place is booked solid." "She got one." Shelley nodded to Lake with another dramatic sigh. "I guess I'll just sleep in my rental car." "You can stay with me," Josie said. "I have a queen-size bed. It'll be like our sleepovers when we were girls." By the scowl on his face, Bentley didn't like that idea. "Let me see what I can do. If I can make something work, I'll come back for that." He glared at the suitcase as if it were to blame for all his problems. "Thanks, Bentley," Josie said, "for everything." He closed the space between them and lowered his voice. "You'll be okay by yourself?" "I'm not by myself. I have Lake, and now Shelley." "Don't let her talk you into doing anything stupid. Do what Lake—" "I can hear you," Shelley said. The woman practically had sonar. Josie scooted past him toward the door. "We'll be fine." She reached to open it, but Lake stepped in, shooed her away, and then inched it open. When she deemed it was safe, she opened it wider. "Fine." Bentley leaned in and kissed Josie on the cheek. She shouldn't have allowed the intimacy, but she didn't want to make a scene. "Let us know about that room." He looked like he wanted to say something else, but he kept his lips clamped shut as he walked out. The tension in the room lessened considerably when Lake closed the door. Josie turned back to her friend. "I'm thrilled you're here," but praying a hotel room would be available. Shelley was a night owl, and Josie needed her sleep. If Shelley stayed with her, Josie'd have to fight to get into bed at a decent hour, which she needed to do in order to be in the kitchen downstairs before dawn every day. Now that Bentley was gone, her friend's trademark smile was back. "I should have warned you I was coming. I wanted it to be a surprise." "You accomplished that." Josie moved into the tiny kitchen and called through the open door. "Hungry? Thirsty?" Yes and yes. She slipped into the room and leaned against the door jamb. "Are you limping?" "I sprained my ankle last week. It's much better, though." In fact, she hadn't thought about it as she'd been moving around her apartment. "Just a snack," Shelley said, "since it won't be long until dinner." "I don't have a lot, but we could go to the café and grab a couple of cookies." "That's all right. Crackers?" Josie found the box and set it on the table in the living area, followed by flavored water for Shelley and iced tea for herself. Facing Lake, she said, "You need anything?" The bodyguard shook her head. Josie slipped into a chair, and Shelley followed suit. "So, seriously, what are you doing here?" "Why does there have to be another reason? I wanted to make sure you're all right." Josie let her expression show her skepticism, and Shelley sighed. "I needed a break from the job, and Washington, and everything." "The real answer must be the elusive everything. What's going on?" She shrugged, breaking the club cracker into tiny pieces on a napkin. "I had an argument with my boss. Nothing huge, but we have different visions for one of our clients, and I might have gotten a little exuberant with my objections." Shelley worked for a political consulting company. Where Josie was good at crafting messages, Shelley was brilliant at putting together the visuals. She managed photo shoots and logos and flyers and yard signs, anything to do with a candidate's public image. "You didn't get fired, did you?" "Nothing like that. But he wanted me to take time away." Josie'd known her friend long enough to know how to wheedle information out of her. It just took asking the right questions. Shelley was usually dying to share, even if she knew she shouldn't. It was one of the reasons that, though she'd longed for a job in politics like Josie's, she hadn't been cut out for it. Too many secrets she was terrible at keeping. "And did something happen that caused you to disagree with your boss? Something with the job?" No, it was nothing like that." She didn't miss playing 20 questions with her friend. "Something outside the office, then? A disagreement with your family?" "The family's fine." "A boyfriend?" Shelley's blue eyes brightened. "Bingo." "He's so amazing, Joe." "You haven't told me about this one." "Oh, you'd love him. He's absolutely wonderful, strong and handsome and powerful." "Powerful?" That could mean a lot of things. Shelley dated her share of powerful men. Another word for them, abusive. She was incredibly attractive, but she'd always been drawn to the kinds of guys Josie wouldn't look at twice. Good-looking, but also controlling and manipulative. Men who used her not just for her looks, but for her trust fund. Shelley was Josie's oldest friend, and for many years, they'd been as close as sisters. They'd both given their lives to Christ in middle school, and they'd both drifted away from their faith in college. But where Josie had rededicated her life to him a few years back, Shelley had kept drifting. Now, though Josie still loved her friend, they didn't always see things the same way. Shelley gushed about her new guy. He's very successful. He has money of his own, so he doesn't need mine. In fact, he pursued me before he knew who my father was. He loves me for me. I can't wait to meet him. Shelley pressed her hands to her chest. You're going to love him, Joe. He's just perfect. And you know what else? He goes to church, like every single Sunday. I even went with him a couple of times. Really? She tried to keep the incredulity out of her voice. That's great. Do you like his church? Sure, it's fine. Different from where your family went when we were kids. More modern, I guess. I love the music and the messages. I used to think church was all about God telling me what to do and what not to do. But I'm starting to see what you've been saying for so long, that God wants me to behave not for him, but for me, you know? Josie leaned closer to her friend and took her hand. I do know. He's like the kindest father. He only wants what's best for us. I'm starting to realize that maybe, if I'd done things his way instead of my own over the years, I wouldn't have gotten myself into so much trouble. Hope bubbled like a spring in Josie's heart. She'd been praying for Shelley for so long. For years, Josie had figured she was the only Christian Shelley had in her life. Unlike Josie, whose parents were believers, Shelley's parents never bothered to attend church. The only time Shelley ever went was with Josie and her family. What's his name? Josie asked. Anybody I know? Jay. I'm sure you've never met him. He's sort of well known, so we're keeping our relationship on the down low right now. He's divorced, and he has a custody hearing coming up. He doesn't want our relationship to cloud the issue. He's the best father, really. I take it he's older than you? She shrugged. A few years. He married young. Now he's a single father, and that takes precedence over me. Josie knew her friend well. That's gotta bother you. But Shelley just shrugged. He has a vacation home, and he took his kids there for a month. It's awful, him being gone. But I totally understand that they have to come first. And then this thing happened with you. It seemed like... Is it weird to think maybe God orchestrated it so I could be here? Wow. Shelley had matured since Josie had seen her last. Josie stood to hug her friend's shoulders. Not weird at all. I think you might be right. Shelley towed the vacated chair. Enough about me. Sit and tell me about the hottie. I assume you don't mean Bentley. She mimed, gagging. Please, he's about as hot as a broken toaster. Don't hold back, Shell. Tell me how you really feel. Her friend giggled. What is he doing here, anyway? Josie shrugged. He wants us to get back together. You're not going to, are you? She looked as horrified as if Josie had just admitted to falling in love with a kangaroo. Josie'd gotten over Bentley in the years since she'd left him. Now that he was back, she didn't know what to think. Sometimes, when he looked at her just so, she remembered what they'd had together. They understood each other. They appreciated each other's gifts. But he was as much a part of the D.C. landscape as the Washington Monument. Could he be happy apart from that? Or would he spend their lives trying to pull her back in? Shelley was watching her, so she answered truthfully. I have no plans to. I'd have to kill you if you were, and you know how much I like you. That would ruin my whole week. Josie couldn't help but laugh. What do you have against him anyway? He's just not for you. You changed when you were with him. Josie had changed, but she couldn't blame Bentley for that. She'd become so steeped in the culture of Washington that she'd begun to take on its color and flavor. That wasn't Bentley's fault, it was hers. You two were like this scary power couple. You and him against the world. You were so serious, working all the time, never resting, never laughing. You weren't happy when you were with him. Josie started to protest, and then she let herself hear what her friend was saying. Shelley wasn't wrong. Much as she wished she could deny it, she and Bentley had been like that. Everything in their relationship had been about winning, taking on the bad guys and bringing them down. And they'd done it well. At first, Josie'd managed to hang on to herself and her values. But after a while, memories of those last few months in Washington assailed her, filling her stomach with acid. Would that she could go back and do everything differently? It wasn't just that, though, Shelley said. If I thought you loved him, and he loved you, I'd have been all for it. But it wasn't about love with you two. It was about power. It seemed from the outside, and don't get mad, okay? But it seemed like you were using each other more than loving each other. It was just weird. Shelley, Josie's flighty, flaky friend, had seen beneath the veneer others never knew was there. She'd seen the truth long before Josie'd recognized it. Even now, Shelley put words to what Josie'd felt back then, and what she feared now. She gripped her friend's hand. "You're incredibly insightful. I just see and hear more than the average person." Both true. The woman had superhero senses. Shelley continued, "Which means I didn't miss the hottie. Tell me about him." "Thomas. He's a customer who's turned into a friend." She told Shelley about the sprained ankle and how he'd brought her the crutches, and about how he'd jumped between her and danger the night before. "Oh my gosh," Shelley said. "He saved your life." "It wasn't that dramatic." "You don't know that, and then carried you inside?" She collapsed back in her chair and fanned her face. "Mamma mia, what a hero!" Josie kicked her lightly. "Get a grip, goofball." "Ow!" She held her leg as if Josie's tap had been painful. "You trying to kill me?" "Keep it up." Shelley laughed, and Josie joined her. With all the stress in her life, it was a joy to have a friend to share everything with. "What was he doing in the meeting with your dad?" "You wouldn't believe it." She told her friend how Dad and Carlisle had blindsided him, offering him Josie's expertise in exchange for her protection. "I know Thomas well enough at this point to know he can take care of himself." He didn't feel pressured into taking their deal, even though they were most definitely pushing him. But that they did it without even consulting me. She was still angry about that. Not surprised, though. She'd forgotten how forceful her father could be. Living away from him, it was easy to remember him as the guy in the library surrounded by books, like an absent-minded professor. Today, she was reminded of Senator Harrington, the man who was accustomed to getting what he wanted and not afraid to use any method to do it. Not that she could blame Dad. He'd grown up in a political family. His father'd served in the Senate before running for governor, and winning. His grandfather had spent more than half his life in Congress, rising to leadership. She'd loved and respected her grandfather. She knew her great-grandfather had done good things too, but she wasn't proud of everything they'd done, particularly their fight against civil rights reform and school integration. Dad didn't think like them, but he was part of a legacy. Some of that was impressive, some of it shameful. All of it, her family's political legacy, she wanted nothing to do with. "So you're going to help with Thomas's campaign?" Shelley asked. Her question sparked an idea. "How long are you staying?" Shelley smiled. "As long as you need me. And before you ask, I'll do whatever you and the hottie need." The song Matchmaker, Matchmaker from Fiddler on the Roof might as well have been playing in the background. Josie didn't want to think about what lengths her friend would go to push her and Thomas together. The thought should have brought anxiety, perhaps even a stern warning. Instead, she found herself fighting a smile. She yanked Shelley from the chair and hugged her tight. "I'm so glad you're here."
Chapter 14. The weather was perfect the following Saturday afternoon. The sky was bright blue and dotted with puffy white clouds. The temperatures had reached into the low 80s, a little warm for Thomas's taste, especially in his suit. But the tourists loved it. Families sunbathed on the beach while kids splashed in the calm water of Lake Ayasha. Thomas was chatting with old friends in the grassy park near the sandy beach when Josie's silver sedan slid into a parking space. He said goodbye and hurried that direction. He'd offered to pick them up, but she and Shelley and two bodyguards had gone to Plymouth that morning, so they'd agreed to meet him there. The Masked Intruders Monday night had marked the first event of an interesting week. Tuesday, after the conference call with the senator and Carlisle, Thomas had met with Derek to get on paper his opinions about the various issues facing Coventry. That evening, Josie had organized his rambling ideas into straightforward statements in such a way that they would resonate with voters. He'd just watched in awe. The rest of the week, he'd made calls and ginned up support. He'd talked with Chelsea Hamilton, Dylan's wife, to learn about her short-term and long-term hopes for Coventry. They weren't so different from his. By the time he left that conversation, he felt confident in Chelsea's support, and that of the board of directors of HCI. As he crossed the park, he thanked God for Josie's help. He was miles beyond where he'd been the previous weekend, all thanks to the woman he was rushing to meet. By the time he got to Josie's sedan, Lake and her partner Donley were standing on either side of the car. Donley was tall and built, more NFL tight end than linebacker, but obviously powerful. Thomas smiled at the guy. "How's it going?" Donley's serious disposition didn't change at all, but he did open the driver's door. Josie stepped out, thanked her bodyguard, and grinned at Thomas. "You look great." It was his best suit. He usually chose colored shirts, but Shelley had told him to wear white. There'd been no room for Shelley at the hotel down the block, so Thomas had offered her his condo for the duration of her stay. He'd moved a few things into the apartment over his insurance agency, where he'd lived before his business had taken off. It was old and dingy, but it was close to Josie, which was all that mattered. When he'd gone to his condo on Thursday to grab more clothes, he'd discovered that Shelley hadn't had any trouble making the space her own. She wasn't exactly the tidiest person he'd ever met, and her things had been scattered everywhere. But she was Josie's friend, and according to Josie, she was also extremely gifted. Thomas was going to be the recipient of her gifts today, which was why they were meeting at the park. She'd gone through his closet, he was still recovering from the thought of that, and decided that none of his ties were suitable, which was the reason for their trip to Plymouth that morning. He'd told them he could buy his own clothes, but Shelley had insisted. Now she joined them in front of the car and held out a sack. He peeked inside and found a dark red tie. "Put it on," she said. "If it doesn't work, I got a blue one too." "What if I wanted to wear green?" She looked horrified. "You're running for office in the United States of America. You want to wear green? Move to Ireland." Chuckling, Thomas slipped off his jacket and handed it to Josie, then lifted his collar and put the tie on. He wore ties almost every single day, so knotting the thing without a mirror was no trouble. Still, Josie approached and straightened it for him, her cool fingers searing heat through the thin fabric of his shirt. He met her gaze and held it. "Thank you." Pink filled her cheeks as she stepped back. "You look perfect." He'd take perfect in Josie's eyes. Shelley said, "The photographer's meeting us." Her gaze roamed the space. "There he is." She led the way into the park. Thomas followed, Josie at his side. Lake walked on her opposite side and Donley brought up the rear as they crossed beneath trees and around picnic tables and grills to the area farthest from the beach. A huge golden retriever bolted their direction, and a little boy followed, calling, "Reb, come back!" Thomas grabbed the dog's collar and crouched as the kid ran up. "Thanks for catching him." The boy held up a leash. "He got away before I could clip it on him." The whole group had paused. Josie and Shelley were smiling, but Donley gave him the evil eye. Who wouldn't help a little boy catch his dog? "Why don't you do it now while I've got him?" Thomas asked. The kid did, clicking the leash in place. "What's your name?" Thomas asked. "Connor." Thomas held out his hand, and the kid shook it, though his grip could use a little work. If Thomas ever had a son, he'd teach him how to shake hands. "Thomas Windham, nice to meet you." He bent to pet the dog. "And this is Reb, I take it?" "Uh-huh. Rebel. Daddy and me are trying to train him, but Mom says he's dumber than a bag of kibble." Thomas chuckled. "I bet you and your dad will straighten him out." He looked at a couple he assumed were the kid's parents. He lifted his hand in a wave, and they waved back. "Good luck with your training." "Thanks." The dog took off, dragging Connor behind him. Thomas nodded for the group to continue. "Sorry about that." The bodyguards glared, but Josie wore a soft smile that made his insides do a funny little flip. They reached the photographers. There were two which felt ridiculous, and spent hours trying to get the perfect shots for the flyers and website. Stand this way, fold your arms, don't fold your arms, smile, don't smile, look serious, wave. And if that weren't bad enough, people gathered to watch and chat and tell him he had their support or he didn't, and why. He kept stopping to talk to people because, as important as these photos were, and Josie assured him they were important, talking to voters seemed more so, and he was much better at dealing with people than he was mugging for the camera. By the time they were done, Thomas was rethinking the whole run for mayor idea. But the way Shelley was beaming as she flipped through the images they'd captured, he figured it had been successful. "Well done." Josie walked beside him back across the park. Shelley had lingered with the photographers, promising to walk to the cafe when she was finished. Lake stayed in front of them, Donnelly behind. Scents of grilling burgers and dogs filled the air, making Thomas's stomach growl. A glance at his watch told him it was dinner time. "I feel like an idiot," he said. "Why would these people vote for me after seeing that?" "Hey, mister!" The boy from earlier ran up to them, the dog on the leash at his side. "Want to see a trick?" "Love to, Connor." Thomas turned his attention to the dog. "Did you learn your manners, Rebel?" The dog panted in front of them, its tongue hanging out. Connor said to the dog, "Rebel, sit." The dog seemed to contemplate it for a moment, and then it lowered its rump to the ground. Connor gave him a treat, the dog gobbled it up, and the boy beamed. "Wow," Thomas high-fived him. "Good job." "Thanks. See ya." He took off toward one of the picnic tables, where his parents were setting out a feast for their little family. "And that's why," Josie said. He turned to her. "Why, what?" She laughed, slipping her hand in the crook of his arm as they continued walking. He was relishing the feel of her beside him while she explained. "You just asked why people would vote for you after that. We staged this whole thing, guessing how you'd react to the people here, and you did just as we hoped." That had all been for show? They better not think he was going to put up with another photo shoot. "What do you mean?" "They got great pose shots of you, no question. But the best pictures are the ones the photographer took when you were talking to voters and kids. Do you know how many people introduced themselves to you today?" He lost count. A lot. She watched him for an answer, but he just shrugged. "At least 50. And yet you still remember the name of a 7-year-old boy and his dog." "That's my thing. I always remember names." "How do you know how old he is?" "I talked to his parents. They're going to vote for you, by the way." "Oh, huh. It's not just names," she said. "You were talking to people you just met about subjects you'd known next to nothing about a few days ago, connecting with them, making them feel like they were the most important people you'd met all day long. You've got a gift." "I like people," he said. "That's not a gift. It's who I am." She smiled, shaking her head. "That's why you're going to win." He stopped. "You really think I have a chance? If we do our part with the message, the website, the flyers, and you do what you did here until the election, no question." Wow. He'd agreed to run because nobody else wanted to do it, because somebody had to stand up to Farley. But he'd never really thought he could defeat the guy. Josie's confidence in him, it changed everything. They started walking again, not in any hurry. This was the first time he'd been alone with Josie since Monday night. The bodyguards were always there, but Bentley and Shelley had been too. He didn't know when he'd get another opportunity to ask this. "Tuesday during the conference call with your father, you seemed upset at the mention of that doctor's name. The one you said was an abortionist. Jude Mitchell, right?" Her expression dimmed as if the sun had gone behind the clouds. "Yeah. There's a story there," he guessed. "We bumped against each other in Dad's last primary race." "What happened?" He caught a hint of sadness in her eyes. "It's a long story." A story she wasn't going to tell him. They reached the road and crossed to the other side. "You need a ride?" she asked. "I walked down. I'll take a ride back, if you don't mind." "Not at all." Lake checked over the sedan while Donnelly loomed nearby. Then they stepped away as Josie climbed in. Thomas wasn't sure how she'd managed to talk the bodyguards into following in their own car, but once Josie and Thomas were settled in the front seat of hers, a car so luxurious it put us to shame, the bodyguards walked to their black SUV parked in the space just behind. Josie talked about the flyers and literature Shelley would put together with the photographs they'd just gotten, but Thomas's mind wasn't on Josie's words so much as her voice, her presence beside him, and what she was saying, that he really might be mayor. A crazy thought, but Josie knew what she was talking about, and she seemed to think it was possible. He'd do everything she said and try his very best not to screw it up.